Jerry, thank you for being here today and sitting in our panel. And would you like to talk a little bit about your remembrances and experiences with NEMLA and your perspective now that you're retired? And then we have the question that I've given you about cooperative collection development and your opinion about that.
Thank you. I moved to Boston, the Boston area, from Baltimore in 1976. The tall ships were in, by the way, when I left Baltimore. And I was here for I came up, having left by then, came up for the 40th anniversary, and I did hear that commissioned piece at Wellesley. It was really very nice. I probably went to NEMLA meetings. The reason that I don't remember my first meeting was, I suspect, that it was just the normal thing that you went to the meeting. And so I assumed I began to go to NEMLA meetings in 1976, and that's that. But one thing that impressed me in particular was the effort people made to get to the meeting. I mean, those folks in northern Maine, they drove a long way and they got up very early. In thinking about that, I suspect that has to do in part with the sense of regionalism that I find quite strong in the New England area. I mean, if you look at what happens when a job opens up, the new appointee is frequently also from the New England area. So I think there's that the cohesiveness of the chapter is related to the cohesiveness of the region. In a professional sense, I was most active in the Boston area music library. So, and that's a different kind of a group. You can undertake projects that can only be done when you're in close proximity, as we were there. So that the two organizations are quite different, although the ease with which you can get in touch with your colleagues is, which you feel you can get in touch with your colleagues, is the same on the regional level, I thought, as on the local level. So that cohesiveness is a prominent feature of my thoughts and memories of NEMLA, and I assume it will continue. To switch gears slightly to my presence here as a substitute for Michael. Michael and I met at our first MLA meeting. We met on the bus coming in from O'Hare Airport, and since there were only 2 people left by the time we got to our hotel, we each concluded that probably the other was going to the same meeting, and so we have a connection that I just want to tell you about because I'm sitting here right now. Michael's topic was collection development, and the word digitization occurs in it, and I'm going to kind of take a detour in that direction in a different way in a moment. I haven't been a traditional music librarian for a long time. I mean, I was the music specialist in the Policy and Standards Division, which I should say has nothing to do with the music division. That's part of the main cataloging portion of the library, and it's independent from the music division. Whatever may have happened recently, that's something else. And I kind of lost my train of thought when I went off on that. Oh, collection development. I have yet to understand how what is essentially today a system where you don't acquire things, you lease them, and I find that extremely troubling. I can't connect that to what I felt I needed to do as, I was the collection development person, that's the best part of it, I just loved it, which is to get music on the shelf for students to discover. And remember, my experience is in conservatory libraries, first the Peabody, then the New England Conservatory. That's where the performers, the musicians of the future are being trained. And we have got to make sure that our students know repertory and can play it, although everyone seems to have his or her technique by the time they're 12 now. I mean, well, that's what Boulanger said. You should have your, Nadia Boulanger said you should have your technique by the time you're 12. And as I was in the field, over the time I was in the field, my God, they seem to have done that. I find it stunning. Anyway, they can play anything, but they have to know repertory. And yes, I realize that right now, teachers are complaining that their students don't know the Brahms symphonies. I don't know how to deal with that. But when I was buying materials for libraries, students themselves made it clear to me that they needed things to play. And it needed to be on the shelf to be discovered by them. Okay, so now we have a digitized catalog, which is kind of where I'm going eventually, so that when you told a student who is looking for a certain combination of instruments, where the places on the shelf he or she should look, and since you were worried that things might be off the shelf, on a number of occasions, I let the students look at the shelf list. Now at least you can look at the shelf list online and you can find what the library owns, and it's more flexible. Having the catalog records online for reasons that I don't need to repeat here. But this will lead me to what isn't on the program today, but I thought was important. There, in the various discussions and suggestions and approaches that I read in the literature I got before the meeting, the emphasis seemed to be on collection development and on digitization, and of course there are commercial aspects of that which are really important. But what I didn't find was how do you get students into well, we've been calling it the catalog, but I will say into the resource database, because the concept of catalog is a little too narrow now. We need to do more things. It's our responsibility now to detach now that everything is digitized. Let me pull back a little bit. First, we digitized the card catalog, as it were. Then we digitized LCSH, that went online. And then we digitized LCC, and my comments here are applicable to libraries that have the Library of Congress classification system. I know Dewey is online too, but my experience is with LCC. So what we ended up with was all of our 3 major standards were online. So the next question is, okay, what are we going to do with that? And pretty much we haven't done anything. Very little has been done. The ability to use the online classification scheme in as a reference source is barely touched. And since I was working at the library with a close friend of mine, in fact, the law classification specialist, she made sure I knew what was going on in her field because she was inventing most of it. The exploitation by the law community of the use of the Library of Congress classification in their area as a reference tool is far ahead of anyone else's. We have essentially done nothing. They've done interactive maps. Well, law may be one of the disciplines where the approach is often by place, so is some music. We haven't done anything in the area of interactive maps, and we desperately need that kind of thing. I've heard laments, but I'm not sure whether there's any action. The most basic observation is that you can Google anything, but only in one language. how we continue to advance the needs for controlled vocabulary. I mean, this is all up to us folks, partly because music has always been a little different. I don't like to emphasize how different, but we've always had to fight for what we need, and I don't think the fight is over. I think it's barely begun. Where LCSH is concerned, the Library of Congress subject headings, which are being deconstructed into their various categories, finally, is a left-anchored linear system of limited vocabulary that I'm sure everyone here can, about which one can probably say 10 things, each of you, 10 ways it doesn't adequately satisfy the needs of music users. So my encouragement to everyone would be, think about the future and knowing that what we do is easier to continue doing than inventing something new. Don't let go, because we won't get anything unless we make a big issue out of it. Thank you.
Thank you for inspiring us to take up the gauntlet and continue our
But in totally
work.
new directions.
Yeah. Well, well, I'd like to open up the panel to answering questions from the audience, or I'm sure many of you are here that have. Oh, Jean.
I'd like to go back and respond
Oh, okay.
in Joe's question.
Okay.
It was about our position as copyright cops. We've always assumed proudly.
Use the microphone, please.
Sure. This is a topic that I would be happy to see NEMLA address soon on future meetings. Up until very recently, certainly at my institution, we were happy to assume that role, and faculty especially respected our knowledge and came to us most of the time. And we dispensed the information and did our best job to make sure that copyright wasn't being broken too often. But recently, and I don't want to say too much because I'm indicting my own institution on videotape, but I see that our faculty are so obsessed now, particularly with the undergraduate population, of making things as immediately accessible as possible, particularly the performers who have no time, as we know, to do anything besides practice. And I really don't know how to proceed now. I mean, there's just absolute wholesale, flagrant copying of scores, and they're being deposited in Dropbox, and I mean, the students just assume it's going to be immediately available and don't have a clue that there are legal copies in the library that they could go ahead and study or take out. So I seem to be being totally bypassed right now in the library, and I'm not getting the copyright questions anymore. They're going out there and doing what they want. So I think we need to deal with this. We need to stay involved and be active, but I don't know how to begin to proceed with it. So. Anybody else having that experience?
Well, my experience has been that they'll, if it can be found on in a public domain version, that's the edition that these students wind up using. You know, they'll go to IMSLP and use whatever is available online if they can't get it otherwise, which makes me, this is why I raised the question about, you know, we have these, you know, we have the, for primary resource material, manuscripts and everything, that's fantastic that we now have many of these resources available to scholars. But for the editions and music that's performed, what's available online is not necessarily what we want our students to be looking at and performing. I don't know, I just threw that out, or if anybody else wants to chime in on this topic, because I think it's a really important one.
May I comment on that? Because it has bothered me ever since music began to be available online. The extent, I certainly haven't measured or tested anything, but simply intuitively, the extent to which this is undermining scholarly research seems to me stunning. I mean, what's the point of doing it? There's a conflict of interest here somewhere. I don't know what the solution is either. It's a kind of distribution problem. Yes, we buy all these editions that are so expensive, but they aren't easily available. So what's going, I'm out of academia now for a long time. Don't the people who are doing this scholarly work have any concern about this system of undermining what they're doing? Am I right about that? I seem to be from what is this? What's going on and what are we doing about it?
Yeah, Jerry, I agree with what you said. I mean, the fight has just begun. And actually, to this last question, too, what Eugene was talking about, bypassing the library, about sort of instant access thing. I think there's how we access things. I think there's a way of. I think the big question that I always wrestle is how does the library make a better presence in this digital, virtual world of scholarly things are going on, so that we can have more influence in how people see us. I think so that they're not just bypassing us, but they understand there's something else there. I think a lot of times people are using electronic resources, they don't even understand that they're using the library or something that's provided by the library. There's a service there. So I'm wondering just put this to the panel, and actually anyone here, just put, moving forward, this is what I'm wrestling with. How do we redefine our sense of access through this digital, virtual realm that we have to wrestle with? Because I don't think we've answered, we haven't gotten there, and that's what we need to do, I think.
Does anyone else have any comments or anything they want to add? Can you give me can you stand and give us your name, please, and your institution? Linda.
Well, I think what's important about that is, as you're saying, the connections and the outreach. And I think starting with the faculty and impressing upon them what happens when the students come in to find information, and working closely with the faculty so that the faculty are encouraging the students to utilize the library staff and not just online information. is an important place to begin. Courses, the standard information literacy type course for students, if the faculty can support that, and in fact, if the school can require that for, freshman, sophomore, lower level of students, as well as graduate students teaching at a different level, I think that supports the connection and encourages the students to deal with the library staff who will, be able to help them more.
I would agree with that. We've just been undergoing a reorganization at Colby College. I'm turning into a base now. But I think, as we, as librarians working with our public, especially in academia, our jobs and our role has changed very much. And I think that we need to really show how we can be of value to our faculty, because especially a lot of the younger faculty are now finding everything online, and we have to try even more to develop relationships. Being visible, I find, is just really, really important. To go to faculty meetings if you can get yourself into faculty meetings. Talk about our online resources. It's really hard to do that when you're in a huge institution. It's kind of easier to do that when you're in a smaller place and you have the proximity, but when you're in a large institution, that can be hard. But I still think you have to find ways to do that, kind of following up what Linda said. Joe.
Putting on one of my other hats, my career as a librarian has always been in public libraries. And a public library reference interview is measured in seconds rather than an academic librarian is measured in minutes. The difference between battlefield first aid and major university hospital trauma centers. You're dealing with people who come in and slam a pair of headphones and you say, what is this piece? Or it happened to be when someone came in and said, do you watch television? Yeah. What's the music for the Acura commercial? And I said, Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet. But we had this on a daily basis. And also being a public librarian, I came very late in my career, only after I'd officially retired, to working intensely in a library that uses LC. I knew 3 numbers in LC because I used to do a thumbnail sketch of libraries that I was visited. I knew M2, M3, and M1500. Because just by those, I could say particularly the M1500s, I'd look for the unusual. Not the marriage of Figaro's, but I remember walking into the University of North Carolina seeing a full score of Poulenc's Les Mamans de Theresias, and I told Jim Pruitt, I said, get that off the open shelves, it's going to walk. Because it had never been sold. It was, I don't know how they got their copy, but it was always hors de commun. It was only a rental score. And I've learned LC in the last 10 years working at what I call, in this venue, Berkeley West. Because I'm there a lot, I frequently get asked questions. I said, are you a librarian? I said, no, but perhaps. I said, I'm a librarian, but I'm not on staff here. Well, this is getting back to your shelfless questions. What's the number for trombone choir? And I said, there isn't one. She said, there must be one. I said, well, if you're looking for 4-part trombone choir, it'd be in the M400s. If you're looking for 5-part trombone choir, you'll be in the M500s. If you're looking for 6-part or 8-part, then M600s, M800s. But, and then I went, after I shot my big mouth off, I went and carefully checked to make sure I was accurate. Because it's a tricky world out there. And it's a tricky business we deal in music. When I first came back to being a librarian and I had to learn that why Mark was different from Matthew, Luke, and John, I spent many hours at the reference desk when nothing else was happening, toggling back and forth between the plain view and the mark view, because I heard about mark fields, I wanted to see what they were, and I learned that the important thing for me is that we frequently didn't display the 245 when we should have, and the 240 is worthless. But it's a game. Catalogers Catalogers should, with the force of a gun, be forced to do at least 1 hour a week public service.
There we go.
Many don't.
One more question, and then I think we'll have to tie things up.
I'm Sandy Jo Melvin from Harvard Music Library, Question Development. And I just had a comment about copyright and access. Something that I think we're dealing with, and this is for musical scores and not an audio, no audio, in the audio world. But I think is that we need to work with publishers. I think we have to be careful that not to sort of think about the place in which we sit. And that it's not just we're begging and borrowing and so on. I think we really have to work with them to make them understand what our needs are. I've had an opportunity to do a little bit of that, and I think there is some hope that we may be able to turn the tide a little bit. In the same way, I'll just step back for a second, which is that I was involved with working with NISO standard for binding, and for many years, music wasn't even on the page. And every time you go to a meeting, they would say, "Oh, gee, music? They were afraid of us." And that's true. And so, in fact, I like to make a lot of noise, as my colleagues will know. And I think that in that same way, we actually have we're not in the great book of NISO binding standard. We are in the is it the addendum? Which is really important actually, and it's something that Paul Parisi and Gino Oldham actually worked on, and so it's really exciting. If you don't know about it, talk to me, because it's exciting that music is actually in there. So I think in the same way we need to just be loud and push and push and push. In addition to that, Marty Schreiner and I have had a conversation recently just about copyright in general, and what's the future, and is it really something, and I'm afraid to say this out loud, is it something we really need? And I, as much as I feel like I'm just going to go police around that, I feel really like it's extremely important. I also wonder about the future and whether it's something we need to think about in a different way. That access, understanding, the editions are extremely important, but I think, and to me especially as a performer as well, but I think it's something to think about in the future. It's something that we need to
Just have one comment about that. The ACRL best practices and fair use is really a useful document, and I think it does look at copyright in a different way so that we can promote the positive ways that we can use materials rather than being police. And it takes copyright to the limit, really, and pushes it, it's more from the perspective of the user. So I would agree. Jerry?
I've had a wild idea. We're talking about all of this from the perspective of copyright. I think the real issue, to go back to the comment I made before about editions, old editions of things being made available free, and there are our expensive scholarly works on the shelf. How do you make the point that these scholarly editions, or be they in the M2s or 3s or in the M452s, how do you make the point that these have to be taken seriously? So my wild idea is, do we have to make a video, who knows, of carefully selected comparisons between the editions that you can get off the internet and the editions that you can't. And these are students, they've got ears. If you make careful selection, you can play to them or get them to play to each other why the scholarly edition is important. They can hear it. And that's not the copyright part of it, it's the content part of it. And I'm not sure, whether a video is exactly the way to do it, but there needs to be some symbolic representation of what the issue is, so that you don't have to plead with the publishers on one hand and plead with the faculty on the other. You've kind of a living example of why you cannot overlook a scholarly edition just because something in the public domain is easy. It does make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
There is one splinter group or parallel group that deals with this on an ongoing basis and is very concerned with, and that's the orchestra librarians. Because not only are the old, readily available public domain sources of inferior graphic quality, they're frequently of inferior editorial quality. And there is a great deal of ongoing cooperation among major orchestra librarians, particularly as to solutions to problems, corrected editions, standard lists of errata for things that you would think would be relatively trouble-free. But they have to, because a minute of orchestral time is figured in thousands of dollars in rehearsal. And if there's confusion, it has to be solved before the parts ever hit the stands.
Well, thank you. I think we're all, we're running out of time right now, so, sorry, Suzanne. Well, we should continue this over lunch by all means, and I think we've got another topic for a future meeting that I think we've just touched the surface. But thank you so much to our panel, Jean, Linda, Joe, and Jerry, for your insights and your comments.